Ciao ragazzi, this is Katie Portanova, and you're listening to Florence and Me. I'm a lover of stories and all things Italian, and I'm going to bring you all that in this podcast. My intention is to inspire you to step out of your comfort zone and explore life and travel the world. Join me as I tell you my story and many others about Italy and my love, Florence. Andiamo! Ciao a tutti! Katie is back for another episode of Florence and Me. Today I'd like to talk about one of my most favorite things to talk about, are these hidden gem trivia type places in Florence that I happen to have found through an acquaintance friend. I can't even remember his name. But he was Italian, and he and I were friends at the time, and obviously not a good friend because I don't remember his name. But he told me that there were all these things that can be seen if you really look on the streets of Florence. And I might have talked about a few of them in the past, in some of the past episodes, but I'm sure I didn't talk about these. There's this book that I bought because of this guy that I found at one of the bookstores in Florence that was translated into English at the time, but I know it's in Italian. It's called Strolling Through Florence, and I know it's called something else in Italian. But anyway, so these things are things that probably your tour guide, if you went on a big tour group, he might have mentioned some things, but not all of these things, because these things are really hard to see from where you are, like on the ground, because some of them are really high up. Anyway, so we'll start with this first one. It's called Berta's Bell, this legend. There's two legends having to do with this particular statue / piece of stone. Okay, as you can tell, this is how I talk. Anyway, all right. So on the Via Cerretani side of the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, which is Via Cerretani, is the main the main road that leads to the train station, Santa Maria Novella. It turns into two other names, I believe, but more towards the Duomo is Via Cerretani. There is a female head in marble, so not stone, dating back to the Roman times, and there's two legends having to do with this head, and you can't miss it because it's a white marble head. Now, looking at it close up in this book I have, it could be looked at as a woman or a man, in my opinion. So Berta, they named this part of the legend Berta because she lived during the 13th century. She was a commoner and a fruttivendolo, so she sold vegetables right in front of the church. She was famous and a much-loved character of the area, of the quarter, of the neighborhood. So she used to sell her produce right at the foot of this bell tower. So there's a tower where her head is, actually. She was dedicated to the church and to her work of this produce, these vegetables. She never married or had children. When she grew old, she decided to leave all her possessions to the friars at Santa Maria Maggiore, to whom she entrusted the task of casting a bell for the bell tower. Apparently, it didn't have a bell. And this bell was to be rung at sunset in order to warn all the vegetable growers working in the fields outside the city walls, as well as peasants and other traveling people, that it was time to come back into the city walls. Because back then, the city walls, there were the big doors. And if you've watched any, medieval time movie, that's basically what Florence had. They had the 4 doors, and I've talked about the doors before. So they would close them up at night, because outside of the old city walls, it was all like farmland, which it's for me, it's like amazing to even think about still. So what the so the city, so this is why she wanted it, so that's why it's called Berta's Bell. So they created this marble head in the side of the building, side of the church, to commemorate Berta, because she gave all her money to the friars to build this bell. And so this was like a sign of gratitude for the townsfolk of this neighborhood, to give in memory of Berta. The other legend is said the priest who turned to stone. So the same head is another legend. So there's this professor, this scholar called Cecco d'Ascoli, and he was he studied a wide range of disciplines like astrology, astronomy, and alchemy. A scientist and contemporary writer of Dante Alighieri, whom he was harshly critical of Dante Alighieri, and he was also a professor at the University of Bologna. And in 1327, he was accused of witchcraft and condemned to death. So, as he was being taken to the Bargello to be hung or burned alive, I believe it was burned alive, they would do processions of people being condemned to death. And as they passed the church of Santa Maria Maggiore, there was a priest leaning out of this window. And the priest saw him say to one of the soldiers that he was thirsty before he was going to be burned alive. And because the priest convinced that he was the devil, because he was condemned to death because he was said to be doing witchcraft, he yelled down to the soldiers, if you give him water, if you let him drink water, he will never die. Which, of course, is absurd, right? At which Cecco d'Ascoli looked up at the priest, enraged, and said, and your head will never leave that window. And at which the priest was turned to stone in that window. So that's the other legend. Which one is correct? We don't know. I kind of think it's the Berto story, to be honest, but that's my own thought. The other story, which I really like to talk about, and I love this story about, it's not probably the best story, but so there is, in Piazza Annunziata, there is a palazzo that faces the inside of the piazza, okay? And there are these shutters. Now, you probably would never notice, these are things like, again, you would never notice these things unless you really looked for them. So there's these shutters that are always opened. And it's on a specific level, like I think it's the second floor of this palazzo. And there's a story of this woman who moved into that palazzo with her love, the love of her life, and when her love of her life had to go off to war on horseback, so you can imagine how old this story. She vowed to wait there and waited for her love to come back from war. And she waited and she waited and she waited, and lo and behold, he never came back. So what happened? Okay, so for what is told, this is all legend, okay? I've never been in this palazzo. I would like to, because those of you that know me, I love ghost stories and I love spirits. So what happened was this wife, she basically died in that room, okay? And every time after she died, when the body was being taken away, they closed these shutters. And it was one of those bottom half shutters. So it wasn't like the open one, like a door, like a window open. It was like the bottom half lifting up type of shutter. They closed them and crazy things started happening. So books were flying off shelves, furniture was jumping, the lamps were turning on and off, pictures dropping off walls, everything moving. And the members of her family were so scared that they just vowed to always keep these shutters open. And to this day, even when I was there in September, they're still open. Okay, so this is I just love this story because, again, something you would never look up at. And then the other story I wanted to talk about, so that's that story. The other story I wanted to talk about, this is another one of my favorites. So there's this, in the same piazza, Annunziata, which is a street, there's a street called Via de Servi that goes right into the Duomo. Like, you look up and there's the Duomo. There used to be this orphanage there, the Spedale degli Innocenti. And the Spedale is like a hospital. It's like kind of an abbreviation of hospital. So there's this place there's this place right outside of the orphanage where right now you can see, it's still there. It's kind of gated a little bit with like a fence, like a fence. And there is this grate, this like metal grate window. It looks like a window. And then right above the window, there are these babies, and there's like, looks like it's in Latin, something from the Bible, I'm sure. And where there was once a wheel that would go into this window. Okay, so mothers that couldn't take care of their babies back in the Middle Ages, medieval times, for 500 years this happened, I believe. I read it. It's like 500 years. It was a working orphanage. And like in our story, we talked about with the wine doors, they actually made wine in there. So there was a vineyard in there that the orphans actually helped with. But anyway, the mothers would leave their babies, newborn babies, and they would ring a bell. There was like a bell that you could ring, and then they would scurry off, and they would, the nun around to the other side would wheel this baby around, and then attached to the baby, the mothers would attach things around their necks, like jewelry or medals or something, pieces of fabric, something to remember the mother by as the child grew up, what they did. But yeah, so that's a really cool thing, because again, you wouldn't know this unless I'm telling you, unless somebody else is telling you as well. Yeah, so those were like a couple stories I always like telling people, especially when I take them to Florence. These are like the types of stories I like to share when we go on these walking tours, because as much as I can explain, things about the churches, like of course I would take you to my favorite church, Santi Apostoli. I know a lot about that history, and other types of churches that have a lot of history. There's a lot of things in the streets. That's why I always tell people when they plan to go to Florence or any town in Italy, but mostly Florence and Rome, Venice, like the city is a museum. Okay, so there's so much history on the streets of Florence and on the walls, like on some of the palazzi, on some of the palazzos, they have marble plates that say things, like the one near Santi Apostoli. There's a marble what is it? A sign? Why can't I think of words today? That says where the Arno got, how high it got in November of 1966. And that's like incredible, because that whole church was underwater. And because it was right next to the river. But yeah, there's like a lot of cool things that a lot of people don't look for when they're in Florence. So I like to bring those things to you so you can learn a little bit while you're on my podcast. We will be back next week with a new episode. Julia is moving. She's moving her 6 cats and her lovely husband to a town nearby. So she was moving this week, so we couldn't record. So I'm hoping we'll get back next week and talk about fungi. I think we were going to talk about mushrooms, or we might talk about something else. I'm not sure. But I hope you're enjoying all those episodes. I'm having really a lot of fun, like reminiscing about Italian dishes and other things about Italy with Julia. And I hope it's beneficial. And please let me know. Again, if there's anything you like us to talk about, us to research. I plan on bringing some other episodes out, maybe with other types of cool history bits, because I love history and I love everything there is about Florence. So I hope to bring some more episodes for you, to you in the coming weeks. But yeah, please leave me a message on that speak pipe, that little voice message. I will add that to the notes, and I'll see you next time on the podcast. A presto. Allora, buonasera, buongiorno, buonanotte, wherever you are, and have a lovely day. Ciao, ciao. Ciao, ciao, ciao. I am beyond grateful for you listening to my podcast right now. I am so excited to share my journey of living abroad and all of my stories of Florence and Italy and all the places in between that I've visited. If this has reached you in any way and you would like to continue, please subscribe now. Also, go check out my website, trulyitaly.tours, for all my travel experiences. Ci si vede. Ciao.